I just wanted to talk a little bit about how removing DEIA programs are going to really negatively impact everyone, um, but especially I'm someone with many disabilities, and this is going to be horrific for any people with disabilities getting educations or even just trying to get a job in the future. I have a connective tissue disorder, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, that also causes a bunch of other genetic conditions. So I have POTS and inappropriate sinus tachycardia, and chronic migraines, and some other issues. And this causes me to faint and have joint subluxations and a bunch of other negative symptoms. This requires me to have many disability accommodations and to use a service dog. And I've faced a lot of challenges, especially as a scientist with a service dog, because of this. And that was even before all of the new incoming policies and executive orders. But the government sort of removing these accessibility safeguards is going to have some really horrible impacts on disability accommodations as a whole. And this is really, really problematic. I think especially trying to get rid of the Department of Education is going to be really negative because a lot of students rely on this to get their disability accommodations, and it helps fund schools. The Department of Education does not choose the curriculum, so their whole argument about that is completely false. But it does do a lot to make sure that all of the students with disabilities get the accommodations and the programs that they need to learn and survive. I'm someone who's had disability accommodations since high school, and I definitely would not have graduated without them. Due to my POTS, it caused me at one point to faint 3 times a day, so I was very much in and out of doctor's offices and the nurse's office, and I had to have a wheelchair near all of my classes just in case that I fainted, and there was a lot of different accommodations that I had to have just to do well. And I think I ended up being 7th in my class, so despite all of the things that I went through, I was still able to learn, and my school made sure that I was able to get my education and have some accommodations to allow for some flexibility due to all my medical issues. And luckily my school was really amazing and willing to work with me, but that's not the case in all places. So a lot of people very much need the government and the Department of Education to be able to step in and enforce those disability accommodation requirements. And I've also faced extensive issues with denial of disability accommodations throughout many universities that I've gone through. And if I didn't have lawyers and channels to fight back and sort of prevent the denial of my accommodations, I would not be in the PhD program that I'm in. I probably would not have even graduated from college. And I've had to utilize the Department of Education and the EEOC and various state laws and contacting the ADA and all of the different channels to help people with disabilities fight back against any sort of discrimination or denial of accommodations. And I'm really worried about the future of these programs, just with all of these wiping out of DEI and accessibility and a lot of the removal of things from government web pages. And a lot of states are now suing to do an attack on the 504 plans and protections. And this could make it so that people with disabilities are no longer able to achieve higher education. Even now, academia as a whole is just incredibly ableist, and most universities do not have accessible campuses or good offices of disabilities that will provide reasonable accommodations to students or staff. There's just a complete lack of scientists with disabilities in academia, and many feel like they're being pushed out because they can't get accommodations or they're not supported from their university, and that's even pre-Trump. And I think it's really important to note that a lot of scientists go into science to study the disabilities that they have. And in PhD programs, there is an overrepresentation of scientists with autism. And I am an example of that. So people need to be able to have disability accommodations because they allow them to function and do amazing things. The research that we do as grad students is incredibly beneficial to everyone. And we need a diverse field in order to get a good amount of input from various sources, because if you have people that have very similar thoughts and very similar way of lives, you're not going to get a very good diverse outcome intellectually. So in order to be the best that we can be, we need to have diverse groups of people in all places of the workforce. And if there's no protections or diversity initiatives, there's going to be a large amount of schools where scientists are not able to get into the field because of their identities, because of disabilities, or because of their race, or gender, or sexual orientation. Diversity means innovation, and any funding cuts to DEI programs and grants to help marginalized students get into science or into education is going to lead to pretty much only wealthy individuals being able to get higher education or science degrees. And the potential impact on Pell Grants and other programs is going to be devastating if it goes through. And I know a lot of scientists already don't pursue a PhD because the pay is incredibly low and you're there for a long time. And if you have other loans like student loans, housing loans, car loans, medical debt, or some medical conditions that require more expensive hospital bills and medical treatments, this can really prevent people from going into low-paying PhD programs. So then you only have one background of people in there if there's no programs to sort of raise this gap and make it so it's accessible to everyone, and so everyone can afford, housing, food, medical bills, all of the necessities. And with the attack on science by the executive orders, a lot of universities are cutting back on the amount of PhD students that they take in, and funding of grants is being pulled or reduced, and this can lead to less scientific output as a whole. And basic science and research for conditions that are uncommon or expensive to research are probably going to get cut, and they already have been. And basic science, even though it's not directly linked to a disease necessarily, it causes a lot of new inventions, a lot of new outcomes that allow us to further medical research as well. And with the reduction in university oversight fees from the NIH, from executive orders, this means that universities are not going to have as much cutting edge technology, and like maintaining centrifuges and all of the expensive equipment that we have is pretty expensive. And we have a bunch of core research facilities that we need to do research. And not having as much funding for this is going to make science take longer or be less competitive in the US compared to other countries. Research is incredibly expensive. Some of the reagents are ridiculously priced. Machines are hundreds of thousands of dollars each. And these new orders are going to make it so the US is not as groundbreaking in science or other fields. And I guess I'm just suggesting that everyone in positions of power in science try to make your local environment as inclusive and accessible as possible. Even if you're not in charge, try to make sure everything is accessible and inclusive, and spread love to everyone, and inform the general public about all of the issues that we as scientists face, or we as people with disabilities, or people of color. I think there's going to be a lot of behind the scenes work that is going to be really important, because a lot of funding is going to be cut if you publish or put stuff online. And it's really important that the public is aware of these issues so they know how horrible this is going to impact everyone. Diverse workforces leads to better outcomes, better productivity, better profits. There is no negative from DEI. There's no change in the hiring standards. It's just better overall. And there's a lot of research showing this.